You're listening to the Life Like You Mean It podcast, episode number 28. Do you rely on your gut instincts, especially when making important decisions in your life and business? A lot of us do, and a lot of the experts promote listening to your gut as the best way to ensure you're making the right decision that is best for your needs at the time. But not today's expert. Today, we're talking about why we shouldn't trust our gut instincts, especially when it comes to business, in order to avoid decision disasters. My guest today, cognitive neuroscientist, behavioral economist, and disaster avoidance expert, Dr. Gleb Zybersky, protects leaders from disasters by developing the most effective decision-making strategies via his consulting, coaching, and training firm, Disaster Avoidance Experts. He also writes for Inc., Time, and CNBC, and is a best-selling author of his new book, Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. Today, Gleb explains that our gut instincts are still wired to a small hunter-gatherer tribe lifestyle, isolated from other tribes, instead of the modern society filled with social media and global opportunities that is our current reality. Quite literally, we don't have saber-toothed tigers roaming around that we need to confront, yet our gut still tells us to fight or flee when it senses danger, air quotes included. The problem is that danger is not typically truly dangerous situations that are life and death. Rather, they are caused by tension in our relationships or discomfort at being pushed out of our comfort zone when we're tackling a new task. And that's the problem. The disconnect between what our gut is trying to protect us from doesn't match the reality. By following our gut instinct, we are potentially setting ourselves up for failure by making judgment errors that drive bad decisions and lead to poor outcomes. This is what is referred to as cognitive biases, and Gleb explains there are over 100 of them. Gleb is walking us through a couple common cognitive biases today, sharing how to identify and, most importantly, address them. It's a fantastic show that really opened my eyes to a concept I hadn't considered before, which will revolutionize the way I make my decisions both in life and business. If you're excited to learn more about why and how not to follow your gut, this is the show for you. So let's dive right in and let you meet my friend Gleb.
You're listening to the Life Like You Mean It podcast, where we firmly believe that you and only you have the power to make the changes you seek in your life. Survivor of 10 years of child abuse, Lisa Sabaniak, will help you to empower yourself to overcome your limitations in whatever form they take to build the life you truly deserve. It's time to hear from fellow experts who know firsthand what building a successful and satisfying life because of our past experiences is like, and exactly what it takes to do it. If you're ready, willing and able to get honest with yourself, roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty with the hard work that lasting change takes, you're in the right place. Here's your host, NLP practitioner, speaker, Reiki master, author, and chipaholic, Lisa Sabaniak.
Today's episode is dedicated to yogadownload.com, a fantastic website providing so many yoga videos to download, it's almost overwhelming. Those that know me know that yoga is a big part of my life, and it has been now for a couple of decades. I first found yoga like a lot of people. I was looking for something to help me stay fit while calming my mind. I soon discovered that yoga was so much more than that. Being a survivor of child abuse meant for me that I had detached myself from not only the abuse and others who could hurt me, but even myself. Yoga was the very first time that I could feel some discomfort and not panic. In fact, feeling that discomfort gave me strength because I also realized I had full control. I could ease further into the pose, or I could back off until the discomfort lifted. It was the very first time that I felt empowered, and it was a decade after leaving my abuser. I was hooked. Now, I know a lot of people don't have the funds or the time to head out to a yoga studio a few times a week. And while I do recommend that that is the greatest way to start your yoga practice, this is a perfect solution if time and money is the deterrent. Head on over to my website, lifelikeyoumeanit.com/yoga, to read more about yogadownload.com and even learn my personal favorites. That's lifelikeyoumeanit.com/yoga. Hello, Gleb. Thank you so much for joining us on the Life Like You Mean It podcast. I am so excited to hear all about your book and all about the work that you do. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be invited, and thank you so much for having me on.
You are so welcome. So let's get right into it. I love that you've got this book, Never Go With Your Gut, because that seems to be the polar opposite of what everybody tells us to do, right? Everybody's saying, listen to your gut, listen to your gut. So why is it that you say that we should never go with our gut, especially in business decisions?
Well, because everybody else is wrong.
That's brilliant.
Well, unfortunately, we are at the stage in business advice and in general in decision-making advice. It applies to all life areas, not only in business. This book of mine is about business. My next book, The Blind Spots Between Us, is about our personal and professional relationships. But this book, Never Go With Your Gut, is about business. And what the research on this topic shows is that going with your gut is actually really bad advice. It's pretty terrible advice for making decisions because our gut is not adapted to the modern environment. Our gut intuitions, our reactions, our instincts, our feelings, our emotions, what they're adapted for is the savanna environment. When we were hunters and foragers living in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people. So telling people to go with your gut is essentially telling people to do what would be comfortable and good for you to do if you are living in a small tribe in the savanna environment. Now, there are lots of problems as a result. First of all, consider the current kind of tribalism that we're facing right now. Tribalism is pretty terrible because it causes us to want to be with people who are like us, who think like us, who value the same things we do, and reject people who don't like us, who are not part of our tribe. It was very important in the savanna environment for us to be making those sorts of decisions because, if we're kicked out of our tribe, we die. And if our tribe is destroyed by an external enemy, then we die. So it was very beneficial for our survival to be tribal. Very bad in the complex, multicultural, global environment, whether in business settings or in other settings. So tribalism is one big problem. Another big problem of tribalism that comes from the savanna environment is our desire to climb to the top of the tribal hierarchy. Our ancestors, the ones who survived and thrived, were the ones who climbed to the top of the tribal hierarchy and then spread their genes. They reproduced. We are the descendants of these folks. And right now, social status really drives a lot of our decisions, and that causes a lot of problems, which you can talk about in business settings and elsewhere. So that's one aspect of why we shouldn't go with our gut. Another aspect of why we shouldn't go with our gut is the fight or flight response. It was critically important for our ancestors to have very strong fight or flight instincts. They needed to be able to flee instantly when a saber-toothed tiger attacked, and they needed to be able to fight back when an opposing tribe member attacked their tribe. Now, you might notice that in the current business environment, there are many less saber-toothed tigers. Many less saber-toothed tigers. But,
just a few.
Yes, just a few, right, exactly. But if we still react to threats as though they're saber-toothed tigers, and unfortunately, leaders who are told to go with their gut are also praised for that instant fight or flight decision making, which is so horrible. I mean, look at the kind of business outcomes it leads to. First of all, if you look at the rate of small business failure, you can see that the Small Business Administration, for example, in the US, has been tracking small business success and failure for the last 50 years or so. And it has the same steady rate of failure and success. Within the first 5 years, about half of all small businesses will fail. Within the first 10 years, 2/3 of them will fail. And that's all, because the leaders are going with their gut. Same thing with the large businesses. We can talk about many examples there of terrible, terrible business failures. Right now, we have Boeing making some really bad decisions. This is an example of where we really don't want to go with our guts, but unfortunately people do. So that's the problem.
so amazing. Now I'm an NLP practitioner, so neuro linguistic
Mhm.
programming. And when you were talking all about this, it really made me realize that this has an incredible link to the way that NLP looks at things, or
Mhm.
neuroscience looks at the way that our brains work, right? The fact that
Yes.
we've got all of these beliefs about ourselves and about other people and our place in the world, and it skews our view of the world so that, five people from the same family that have had the same upbringing will not see the world in the same way. And people saying something to them, like them listening to this podcast, each of
Mhm.
those five people that were raised in the same home with the same parents and the same rules, they will each take something different away from this conversation because of all of their beliefs that have been generated over the years, their
Mhm.
values, all of these different experiences that they've had. And that it kind of sounds like it's really similar to what you're talking about, is that when you're trusting your gut is based on those past experiences that you've had. So if you've had negative
Mm.
experiences with somebody coming into you, say, and giving you constructive criticism because somebody was mean and they didn't know how to express themselves properly and they didn't know how to communicate effectively. And so for you, constructive criticism is something that actually is hurtful and you don't
Mm.
see the constructive part of it, for example, then if you're a leader in the business community and somebody wants to come in and have a conversation with you, your gut is probably going to say, get the heck out of my office. I don't want anything to do with this conversation. And it's going to affect the way that you are working. Am I on the right track here? Is this kind of similar to what you're talking about?
Yes, this is definitely similar. So, what I'm focusing on and what my research focuses on is the nature part of how our brain makes decisions. What you're talking about is the nurture part, and the nurture part builds on the nature part. Now, when you look at the research, you'll see that people's personalities are shaped about half and half by nature and by nurture. Some you can already see when people are babies whether they'll be more extroverted or introverted, whether they're optimistic or they're pessimistic, and so on. So the kind of decision making that comes from our gut intuitions, from our gut reactions, is the nature part. Now, on that nature part, build up our experiences. So our experiences then builds up on that and shapes it. So, for example, let's talk about tribalism. Let's talk about here in the United States, racism is a huge issue. It's a big, big issue, huge problem, right? So that we have basic tribalism, and racism builds on top of that tribalism. So it is the specific way that tribalism is one of the ways that tribalism is expressed here in the United States. Now, when you go over to India, you'll see that castes is a big, big issue. That's a
Yeah.
major way that tribalism is expressed there. But here in the United States, castes is not a really big issue. Nobody cares, right?
Right.
Except maybe some who are here, so don't want to insult them, but still. So this is how nature and nurture interplay in all of these dangerous judgment errors, cognitive biases, and that's what I'm talking about here. How the interplay of nature and nurture. So the nurture, racism or whatnot, comes from your individual culture and experiences and builds on this basis of nature, of the ingrained instincts that we have in us.
That is fascinating. Yeah, tell me more of this idea of cognitive biases, because I know you talk about this a lot in your book, right? This is kind of the foundation of things. So explain to the audience exactly what cognitive biases are.
So recent research, well, recent, coming from the 1950s onward, let's say that way, has shown that our brain is screwed up in a whole bunch of ways. And these ways are called cognitive biases. So, yep, that's exactly what it is. Folks can look it up on Wikipedia. There's a list of cognitive biases, over 100 cognitive biases that cause us to make terrible decisions and unfortunately result in some pretty bad business outcomes, professional outcomes, and personal life outcomes. So in all sorts of areas. And we can talk about specifics, but here's the broad principle. Because of the way our brain is wired, because of our evolutionary heritage, we make some really bad decisions in current environments that prevent us from reaching our goals. So cognitive biases is everything, any systematic pattern of decision making. And again, it's systematic, it's predictable, we know it happens. And that's why we can make a list of over 100 cognitive biases. It's any systematic, predictable pattern of decision making that leads away from the best decisions for our goals. So whatever we want to achieve, business, a lot of money, start up a company, whatever, have a high position, and in a certain company, whatever we want to achieve, anything that leads away from good decisions in that area is a cognitive bias. And same thing for personal life, same thing for everything. So those are cognitive biases, and we have very many of them. My book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, looks at the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases for businesses, for careers, for professionals, and for financial investments. How do we avoid them? How do we address them? So my research is kind of the second generation of scholars. The first generation of scholarship looked at how we're screwed up and how the points don't matter. that was the 1950s research. Now more in these last couple of decades, the research has been focusing on debiasing. How do we actually fix these problems? How do we address the problems that cause us to make really bad decisions? And that's what I'm focusing on. How do we fix these problems?
Yeah, and that's probably what all the listeners want to know. I mean, probably everybody's on Wikipedia right now looking up the hundreds of them. But so first, I've got two questions with this. First of all, how do you figure out which cognitive biases are running your show? And then what do you do about it? How do you fix it?
Well, how you figure them out is you want to learn about them, because if you don't learn about them, you're not going to be able to address them. So the first thing to do is learn about them. For example, for me, once I went to graduate school to study this topic, and I've spent over 15 years in academia researching this topic, as well as 20 years as a consultant, coach, trainer, helping people address these problems in their business and in their careers. But the 15 years that I spent in academia, once I went into academia, I discovered that I suffer from one of these cognitive biases called the optimism. I mean, I suffer from many of them, but the strongest problem for me is called the optimism bias. Now, the optimism bias is kind of like it sounds, where people tend to be too optimistic about the future. So that means that I have too high expectations about what's going on. I'm risk blind. I think I think the grass is green on the other side of the hill, but it's way too often yellow.
Right.
So that is the kind of problem that I face. And that is a pretty typical problem. So that means that I make mistakes because I have too high expectations, and that sort of stuff. And I can talk through that. There's a lot of business leaders who are in the same position that I am, especially people who are at the top of companies, startups, entrepreneurs, and so on. They tend to be too optimistic, and they tend to be risk blind, and their businesses, that's one of the reasons they start businesses, because they're too optimistic. And those who succeed tend to make a lot more mistakes in the future, even after they're successful, because they're risk blind. So that's one area, that's one example. You want to discover what's going on with yourself and what kind of cognitive biases you suffer. Now, my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, has a section in the end, an assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, which talks about the kind of behaviors that are associated with each cognitive bias. So, for example, the first question on the assessment asks, of all the projects that you had over the last year, so think back to all the projects and think what percentage of them went over time or over budget. So think about that, audience. All of your projects, how many went over time or over budget? What percentage went over time or over budget in the last year? When I ask that in my presentations to business leaders, I get anything from 5% to 98%. So, when you see the 98%, that's going to be a serious problem. Anything under 10% is pretty okay. I mean, that's okay. If it's under 30%, you're still kind of okay. You might want to check it out. Anything over 30% is going to be a problem. Anything over 50% is going to be a serious problem, because then you're just investing your resources wrong. You're thinking. And that's a cognitive bias called the planning fallacy. That's a pretty typical cognitive bias where we think that our plans will go according to plan. You've probably heard the phrase, failing to plan is planning to fail. Unfortunately, that's also a misleading piece of advice because the planning fallacy shows us that we make plans as though that they will actually turn out true, but too often they don't. We don't think about a lot of risks, a lot of problems that might come up and screw up our plans. So this is a big problem for us and big problem for businesses that make strategic plans and try to go forward, which they don't turn out well. So those are two. That's the planning fallacy and the optimism bias. And you can tell that you suffer from the planning fallacy if you have more than 10% of your projects that go over time or over budget regularly.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I bet you, I mean, obviously, everybody listening is working in some field or another, but I bet there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are listening right now going, oh my gosh, I'm not even sure that I'm actually looking at the things I do as actual projects. You know what I mean? From some of the people that I talk to, it's like they don't even have themselves organized and thinking about it in that type of way to be like, oh yeah, I've got an idea that I'm going to start a blog, for example, or I'm gonna write a course. And they've given themselves a deadline for when they want it up and running, just so that they have something to work towards. But they don't necessarily even look at it like it's a project and all the steps that need to happen to get there, right? Like,
yeah, that's a problem.
That's a big problem.
Yep,
oh my
that's
goodness!
A big problem.
I love this.
Yeah.
So obviously identifying the issue is the first step, but
yes.
it sounds like you're saying that there is some hope here that you can actually overcome some of these biases, these different dangerous judgment errors that you've referred to before. So I assume that it's going to be different depending on which bias you've identified.
Well, there are two things that you can do. One is address individual cognitive biases, and two, there are techniques that I describe in the book which address a large number of them at once. So let's go with the first ones and take a look. Since we're talking about the optimism bias and the planning fallacy, let's talk about how to address those. So the planning fallacy, I was working with a company in Pittsburgh, a heavy manufacturing company, which was having a planning fallacy problem. Basically, they were bidding on projects, and it was a pretty significant project each time. They would bid $2 million on a heavy manufacturing contract, and then it would turn out to cost them $3 million. They would build as their cost, and then they would bid on a project. They would say that they would build it for $5 million, and it would cost them $7 million. So they systematically, every time, like literally every time, they underbid, and of course, as a result, their profit margins were much lower than they wanted them to be. Sometimes they even lost money. So that was a big problem for them going forward. And they brought me in to talk about, hey, what's going on? How can we address this? So what happened is that they did not integrate the information from previous projects into their new projects. They just didn't. They didn't look at their previous projects. They just finished that project, wrapped it up, and went forward to the next one saying, hey, we can do this and let's go and do this. And once they started, based on the revisions that we made to their bidding process, once they started integrating the information from their previous projects into their new projects, their bidding became much more accurate. And they would, if they bid the $3 million, it would cost them, $3 or $3.5 million at most to build. So they were much more accurate going forward with their bids after they started integrating information from their previous bids. And that's a very effective way of addressing the planning fallacy. So let's go to everyday life example. If you're typically late to meetings, that means that you're most likely suffering from the planning fallacy because you leave for a meeting that's 15 minutes away, 15 minutes in advance.
Right.
But you're not thinking about, all those times when you forgot your keys, or if you forgot your laptop, or, your car was running out of gas or something like that. You forget all those things. That's how our brain works. We like to think that we are good people, and we like to think that our plans will turn out well. That's what our gut feels. Our gut is comfortable with perceiving us as good people. It's very uncomfortable with looking for negative information about us. And thinking back to previous plans that didn't work out is negative information. It's very unintuitive to do so. It goes against our intuition, so it's very uncomfortable. So we tend to not think about these things, and that screws us up going forward. And of course, the way to address it is to think about what happened in the past and how we can address it going forward. So that's for planning fallacy.
This is the perfect spot to take a quick break to talk about yogadownload.com, a website bringing you a huge range of yoga videos for you to download and enhance your home practice. I have a few favorite videos like the Yin Yoga for Self-Trust by Caitlin or the Yoga Ritual Evening Class by Mark. If you're like me and you love to practice yoga, or you're interested in getting started and finding out what yoga is all about, but you don't have the time to get to a yoga studio a few times a week, then this is a great solution. Head on over to my website, lifelikeyoumeanit.com/yoga, to find out more about this offer. That's lifelikeyoumeanit.com/yoga. This link can also be found in the show notes. My 30-minute webinar, 3 Steps to Finding Personal Purpose After Abuse, is designed to help you identify the coping strategies that worked so well for you in the past, but are actually holding you back now. In this free webinar, you'll get my 3 step-by-step proven strategies to gain personal purpose after abuse to build the life you deserve today, and we'll learn why trying to forgive yourself for your abuse is not a good strategy for healing from your abuse. You'll also learn the secret to making better decisions that truly meet your needs and propel you forward to a life on your own terms. How my clients are living their dream lives while no longer feeling guilty for their abuse, and the secret mindset strategy that makes it happen practically overnight. What do you have to lose? It's free. Head on over to lifelikeyoumeanit.com/purpose to find your free webinar today. That's lifelikeyoumeanit.com/purpose. This link is also in the show notes. This is the perfect spot to take a quick break and tell you about my friend Chris Attlee's amazing new online course for coaches, the Coach's Code. This is the perfect course for coaches who know they are meant for greatness and to impact more people, and who are tired of grinding it out and spinning their wheels. Look, even the best coaches in the world have the potential to struggle to get their business off the ground. Achieving success as a coach happens when you have clearly defined goals, have a roadmap to reach those goals, understand exactly which steps to take, align your thoughts with abundance, and when you manifest and operate your business from a place of flow. Award-winning coach Chris Attlee will help you to do just that in her virtual course, The Coach's Code. To get more information and register today, visit lifelikeyoumeanit.com/coaching course, all one word. This link will also be in the show notes. The Coach's Code, the proven process to build your dream coaching practice at lightning speed.
For the optimism bias, what is really helpful is to actually run your ideas by pessimists. And pessimism bias is the opposite of the optimism bias, where people tend to think the grass is yellow on the other side of the hill when it's green. So people who are too risk averse, who don't start projects, you will almost never find the pessimists as an entrepreneur, because they don't like to take risks and they don't think that things will work out, even when they do, even when they would work out. So you would find them in a CFO position, or maybe the HR director position in an enterprise. They wouldn't be the entrepreneur themselves. They wouldn't be a founder. So you want to make sure to find the pessimists by whom you can run your ideas, and that's going to be incredibly helpful. I was fortunate that my wife happened to be a pessimist, so I run my ideas by her, and that is really helpful, because a pessimist, what their strength is, if you're an entrepreneur founder, you have great ideas spouting all the time. You have 20 wonderful ideas before breakfast, But what you want to do is give those 20 ideas to a pessimist, and the pessimist will say, of these 20 half-baked potatoes, these 3 potatoes may be worth finishing baking. And then they'll tell you how to actually solve the problems that are associated with these, 3 half-decent ideas, and will make them really decent. So that is the way to address the pessimism bias. And like I said, there are specific separate techniques to address a number of cognitive biases at once, but I want to see if you have any questions about how to address individual ones first.
That's really awesome, and it really, I you see people all the time who are opposites attract type of thing, right? And
yes.
You always wonder why do opposites attract all the time? And it seems to work so well. But you just describing there about the optimist and the pessimist, that makes total sense. If both of them are good at communicating and, and being able to have that type of exchange, well, no wonder that type of relationship would work out really well, whether you're talking about, friendships or a work colleague relationship, or like with you and your wife. That's amazing. That's fantastic. Oh my gosh,
yes.
I could go on all day.
No, this is very important, because one of the biggest problems with entrepreneurs and in general people who are hiring others is that they tend to hire people like themselves. They, optimists hire other optimists. They don't hire pessimists. That's the intuitive, comfortable thing for them to do. They want people who are going to be like them. But that means that they don't hire people who complement their weaknesses, and they don't have any new strengths on the team, and you just have other people like yourselves, and you duplicate each other's mistakes. So that kind of really is not a good thing.
Oh my gosh, that is so true, isn't it? I mean, I know myself. I kind of classify myself as a serial entrepreneur. I've been in business for myself for much of my entire life, right? And yeah, I can think back to other experiences, especially in my 20s and even in my 30s, when I would have been looking for team members, and I would have very specifically been looking for people like me, thinking mistakenly that we would gel so well together, right? We would know that we're on the same page, and that's what I'd be looking for, not even thinking, wait a second, you need this team member because you need them to do something that you can't do. You don't know how to do, you don't have the skill to do it, you don't want to do it. You know what, like whatever it is. That is a really, really brilliant point, Gleb. I really, really like that. And I think a lot of people will have an aha moment there.
It is a very important thing that we need to realize, that that's how the best teams are constructed, of people who are cognitively diverse. We don't think about cognitive diversity. We think about other forms of diversity, but not about cognitive diversity. And cognitive diversity is incredibly important to enable you to succeed. And you've learned this over time yourself. It's kind of, the people who survive as serial entrepreneurs, there's extensive research showing that the enterprises that, I gave you the statistics on small businesses failing within the first, half of them failing within the first 5 years. Well, enterprises that are started by older entrepreneurs fail at a much lower rate, and enterprises that are started by younger entrepreneurs fail at a much higher rate. So it's not kind of, that broad statistics hide some age disparities, and people who have learned about these sorts of problems over time, they can address some of them already. But that means that you have to change your instincts, you have to change your intuitions, you have to change your intuitive gut assumption that you should hire someone like yourself, which is very intuitive, very natural, very tribal, to have that new mental habit. It's kind of, you're going from that natural, primitive, savage state to a civilized state, which means you're adapted to the modern environment, not the natural, primitive, savage environment for which you're naturally adapted for. So this is what the book essentially is about. What are the mental steps? What are the techniques that we can use to change our mental patterns to be adapted to the modern environment, to be actually civilized in our decision making, as opposed to just, the natural primitive state that leads to disasters.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I'm already learning so much, and I bet so many others are too. Now, you talk about developing mental fitness. Is this part of what you mean by that phrase, mental fitness?
Mental fitness is just like physical fitness, it's very unintuitive to not eat that third chocolate chip cookie. Second one's okay, but third chocolate chip cookie, that's too much. But our intuitions, our gut reactions are to eat all the chocolate chip cookies, all the donuts. Because in the savanna environment, it was very important for us to eat as much sugar as possible to survive. That was critical. That was very important. So right now we've learned, based on medical advice and so on, to not eat that third chocolate chip cookie, although some of us haven't learned. That's why we have the obesity epidemic. Yeah. So that's a problem. Yeah. Now, it's also very not intuitive to put on our sweats and go to the gym. It's very intuitive to sit in our pajamas and watch Netflix all day. That's a natural state. We're naturally lazy. That's the natural intuitive thing. That's how our brain works. It conserves energy. For the savanna environment, it was very important to not do something unless you had to run down that mammoth and kill it and get yourself some meat, right? Yeah. Those are things you've learned how to do. You've learned how to do physical fitness. But we haven't learned how to do mental fitness. No one is talking about mental fitness, whereas the mind is really the most important muscle you have. Yeah. It's the most important aspect of what you do. And so learning these techniques, learning about the cognitive biases and how to address each one, which I gave 2 examples with the planning fallacy and optimism bias, and the techniques to address a number of them at once, this is the kind of mental fitness you need to survive and thrive and flourish in the modern civilized world. So that is the mental fitness that I'm talking about. Just like each day you avoid eating junk food, sometimes, and and you avoid not going to the gym, or you do go to the gym, you do some exercises, you do physical fitness daily, you need to do mental fitness daily, because your mind is a muscle just like any other. If you don't exercise it, you'll just get in the same bad shape. Yeah. And that will not be good for you. So that's what mental fitness is about. You need to change your mental habits to have healthy mental habits, and then reinforce those mental habits, make sure that you retain them over time.
It sounds like our physical evolution has not been matched yet by our mental evolution. Like our mental evolution is behind, right? It's kind of picking up the pieces here. We physically have evolved, but mentally we're still back in the savannah that you keep describing.
Not quite. It's more like physically we've learned what the right things are. I mean, if you think back to medicine 100 years ago, doctors would be telling you to drink snake oil mixed with, which is a mixture of cocaine, alcohol, and sugar. That was the best medical advice at the time. Now, it would take care of your symptom. I mean, that's what Coca-Cola was originally about, right?
Right, yeah.
That it would take care of your symptoms, but it wouldn't take care of the underlying problem, and it wouldn't be good for you. So we've learned over time, over that 100 years, what we actually need to do to ensure that we have physical fitness. Now we're getting to the stage where the research is showing us the kind of things that we need to do to make sure that we're mentally fit as well, not simply physically fit. We're learning that. We're becoming civilized in the mental fitness arena. And my book is actually the first one to address cognitive biases in business settings. We're at the cutting edge of the research in neuroscience. And this neuroscience is revealing very recently what we need to do to become mentally fit. And that's what my book is about. That's what all of my work is about. How do you become mentally fit and make sure that you don't drink the snake oil of going with your gut?
Yes, I love it. Now, you looking through all of your work before we sat down today, you talk a lot about these decision disasters, which I love that phrase, first of all, decision disasters.
Yes.
But you also, in your work, have 5 questions that you can ask yourself to try to avoid these decision disasters. Do you mind bringing the audience through these questions?
Of course, and this is one of the foundational techniques for actually addressing a number of cognitive biases at once. I mentioned that you can address them individually, which you should once you find out which ones you're most vulnerable to, and you should also deploy these decision techniques to address a number of them at once. So, 5 questions to avoid decision disasters. First question, what important information didn't I yet fully consider? So what evidence didn't I take into account? This question is supremely important because We like to cherry pick evidence that supports our beliefs. It's called the confirmation bias. We look for information that confirms our beliefs. We ignore information that doesn't, because we're uncomfortable with information that shows that we might be wrong, or that our preferred employee that we might want to hire is not the right one, or maybe we haven't done enough market research, but we really want to put together this course that's very exciting for us, but nobody will take it. Well, that's not good. But that is what happens. That's what our gut, unfortunately, leads us in the wrong direction. So you want to look for information that specifically disconfirms your preferred choice, your preferred option. If you can't disconfirm it, if you can't show that you're wrong, that's great. You're more likely to be right, but you want to look for that information. Second, what dangerous judgment errors didn't I yet address? So what cognitive biases have you not yet figured out in this situation? Again, list of cognitive biases in Wikipedia, over 100 of them describing the general cognitive biases and the science behind them. My book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, describes the 30 most dangerous ones for businesses, careers, financial investments, and so on. Third, what would a trusted and objective advisor suggest I do? So think about that person who's a trusted and objective advisor to you. What would they suggest you do in this situation? Think about Lisa. Think about someone you trust. Think about someone who is a wise person and who doesn't have a bone in the game. So if you imagine what they tell you, you just get about 50% of the benefit of asking this question just by imagining what they would tell you. And you can get the rest of the benefit by calling this person, or if you're a millennial, texting this person.
Yeah.
Text. How have I addressed all the ways this decision could fail? So imagine this decision fails completely and utterly. Imagine, you have your course. Let's talk about that course. You launch the course, crickets, nobody comes. Absolutely nobody. That's a problem. So imagine that happened and think about all the reasons why it happened and what you can do to address them in advance. Maybe you didn't do enough market research. Maybe that was the big problem, that you didn't quite target the right market with the course. Or maybe you didn't have the right ways of messaging the right market. Maybe it is the right course. Maybe it is the right target audience, but you don't have the right messaging. So you can take care of these things in advance. And then you can create a contingency plan for what to do if the situation goes wrong. Finally, what new information would cause me to revisit this decision? So what would cause you to change your mind? If you launch a course and you can say something like, if I launch a course and I don't have 30 people taking it within the first 6 months, that means that I've done something seriously wrong. It's a problem. I need to seriously revise the launch plan, the course, whatever. And so you can orient and go ahead and fully commit yourself to working on this course for the first 6 months, and hopefully you'll get to 30 people. But if you don't, you always have that revision point that you can revise things going forward. So asking these 5 questions about any decision is going to be really helpful for you as an individual. And if you do it as a team, it's going to be very helpful as a team, because you get everyone on the same page. They're all asking the same questions. They all have the same information, and you can discuss these decisions together and make sure that you come to a consensus decision.
That's brilliant. And I love how that kind of meshes in with what you were saying before, with having team members working with you, or, like in your case with your wife and bouncing
Yes.
ideas off of her, having team members that complement your weaknesses and look at things differently is going to maybe allow you to bring up some of these other potential things that could go wrong that you're not thinking about, because maybe you suffer from optimism and you're not thinking of all the ways that this could not work out. And somebody else in the team could be like, oh, yeah, this happened to my neighbor's sister. Do you know what I mean? Just stuff like that. That's brilliant. And I love that you brought the course analogy into it, because I tend to be attracting a lot of people towards me recently that are launching courses. And whether it's different Facebook groups that I'm in or just with my own NLP practice. And that it really is a brilliant thing. There's a lot of people with a lot of great ideas, whether it's business, whether it's courses, whether it is podcasts, blogs, it doesn't matter what it is, but courses just seems to be on the forefront right now. I think because you can make such great passive money with it if you've got it right. But they're making that very first mistake where they are thinking about what they would like, and they don't actually take the time to ask their audience, is this even something that you're looking for? Versus they put in all this effort to build a course that they would have loved to have had 10 years ago. well, that was 10 years ago. Do they even need
Yes.
that course now? Do you know what you know? And they're
I
just,
totally know what you mean, Lisa.
yeah,
Yeah, no, it's a challenging problem, and that's
yeah,
called the false consensus effect, where we imagine that other people are more like us or more like younger versions of us than they actually are. We make
yeah,
mistakes about other people. We forget that you might not be neurotypical, you might not be representative of other people. That's why you need to
yeah.
do your market research to evaluate this question in advance, rather than trying to launch something and having it be a big failure.
I love it. I want to know, you're obviously so passionate, and you talked about how long you have been in academia looking
Mhm.
at this, researching it, learning about this. How did you get interested in this line of work, Gleb? What was your kind of aha moment here?
Well, my aha moment was actually my childhood because I've seen my parents making a lot of bad decisions with each other. They kind of fought over some stupid stuff. My mom liked nice sweaters, so she'd go out and buy a $50 sweater, and she'd come back, and my dad would yell at her and say, no sweater should cost over $20, stuff like that. So they had a lot of, and even as a kid, I saw that was dumb. Then, I mean, the worst time, I mean, it's not simply my mom, my dad was the worst. At one time, he was a real estate agent, so he had variable commission based on income, and he made a lot of money during a few months, and he hid it from my mom, said he didn't make money, and he bought an apartment elsewhere, and he leased it out. Now, in a couple of years, once she found out, she was so mad. It was a huge, big blowout
I
scandal,
bet.
and they separated for a while because she couldn't trust him. And eventually they reconciled, but she couldn't really trust him again as she did. And as a kid, that really impacted me. Seeing all those, both the small fights and that huge big blowout fight when my parents separated. It made me realize that adults aren't gods, and they make terrible decisions financially all the time. So that made me
Yeah.
really interested in decision making, and that's what led to me researching this topic and becoming a trainer, consultant, coach, speaker on it, and eventually going into academia and studying it formally.
I love that. That is so fascinating to me. I love learning how people end up finding their diamond in the rough, right?
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much, Gleb. How can people find out more about the work you do, your research, your book, everything that you've got going on?
Sure. Well, my book is available in bookstores everywhere. It's published by a good traditional business publisher called Career Press. So your local Barnes& Noble, university bookstore, props to indie bookstores, whatever. Online, of course, Amazon, Barnes& Noble, any venue online. Check that out. You can find my content on my website called disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. You'll find videos, podcasts, blogs, coaching, consulting, including classes, by the way, and all of that stuff. Now, for talking about classes, there's going to be a really good course on disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. It's a free 8-module video-based course on Decision Making 101. So how do you make wise decisions? Called the Wise Decision Maker course. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. And finally, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I suggest you connect with me there. Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, GLEBTSIPURSKY.
That is awesome. And I'm going to post up all of your social media links and the links for your book and for your website and all of that in the show notes. So anybody that doesn't have a pen and paper and can't remember that, just head over to lifelikeyoumeanit.com/blog, and I will have everything up there on Gleb so that you don't miss a thing. Thank you so much for being on the show. Your course that you've got coming up sounds amazing. So I'm going to check that out for sure. And as soon as we're off this, I'm going to be looking on Wikipedia, let me tell you.
Well, enjoy it. Don't get too depressed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gleb. I know
Thank
that
you. It's
everybody
been a
has just
pleasure.
learned so much from you. So appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been a great time.
Okay, I am seriously heading over to Wikipedia the moment I stop recording this so I can start obsessing over which cognitive biases are running my show. I really love the simplicity of the 5 questions Gleb shared with us in this episode. I mean, they are so powerful and vital, yet they are really straightforward, aren't they? I know without even looking them up that I have an optimism bias, hands down. As Gleb was going through these questions with us, I just kept thinking how perfect they are, and obvious even, yet how I've never once asked myself any of them. Ever. I've been in business for myself for my entire career. Yet it's never occurred to me to think of all the ways my decisions could fail, for example. In fact, I've always taken the stance that thinking about the negative would bring about the negative, so I strictly monitor my thoughts about a new business decision, forcing all negative thoughts out, replacing them with the positive. But now I understand that this actually prevents me from being able to properly and fully address any of the reasons why my decision could fail. It's not being negative, it's doing my due diligence. By identifying those possible paths to failure, I will be able to do more market research, product research, marketing, content tweaking, or anything else to make my offer perfect for my audience rather than perfect for me. It's not negative to address the possible negative in order to plan it right into the positive. It's good business. How curious are you as to which biases you have and how they may be impacting your success in life and in business? Thank you to my guest today, Dr. Gleb Sapersky, for such an eye-opening and game-changing conversation. As usual, all the links to Gleb's website and social media platforms are in the show notes. Just go to lifelikeyoumeanit.com/blog to find them, which will hook you up with all his courses and his book, as well as his other work. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Life Like You Mean It podcast. Now go apply those 5 questions to whatever decision you're currently contemplating and see how they impact your success.
Thanks for listening to the Life Like You Mean It podcast. Head on over to the show notes for this episode and all past episodes at www.lifelikeyoumeanit.com/blog. If you love the show, leave a rating and review. Share that love by spreading the word, post a link to your social media, share it with your friends, and follow or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast hosting site. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, remember to live your life on purpose by living life like you mean it.